Hey everyone, before we start the show, I just want to get some plugs out of the way. If you enjoy this podcast and you're into wrestling, check out the Nerds and Marks podcast or Marty and Sarah Love Wrestling. If you're not getting your fill on movie and entertainment discussion, then check out the Entertainment Buffet podcast. If you want to dive into the world of video games, I highly recommend the Darkcast by my friends over at darkstation.com. Listen to them cover important topics and interview men and women from all over the industry. Thanks for listening and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to give a quick shout out. Now, I am one who started my podcast, and I buy into the theory presented by people like Kevin Smith and Chris Hardwick from Nerdist of if you want to do something, then just do it. And it's a reason why I have my podcast is I always wanted to have a podcast, and I was like, you know what, fuck it. I'm just going to do it. And I wanted to give a shout out to somebody else who lived by that same philosophy and now has his own comic book out in the market that you can go buy right now. The comic book is called Identity Stunt, and it was written by Joe Cachadorian. I had to ask him how to pronounce that name, but he gave me a really easy way to say it. So yeah, he wanted to make his book and he just made it. You can get it at identitystunt.com. You can get physical copies or digital copies. It's also available at Comixology, which is where I picked one up. And I also have a physical copy on the way just because, as a collector, I like to have it from a shelf. I do most of my single issues digitally nowadays, but I'm just going to read the little description here that is listed on Comixology. Identity Stunt, First Blood. Meet professional stuntman Sammy Sam Nasser. Work is dwindling, his marriage is in limbo, and he's trying to save his best friend from self-destruction. Just as he's getting a handle on things, Sam's publicly accused of being the alter ego of Beatdown, his hometown's notorious and unhinged vigilante, by the nefarious Dominus Smith, Beatdown's own arch nemesis. Capturing the bombastic tones of 80s and 90s action films, which is right up my alley, writer Joe R. Cachadorian and artist J. Briscoe Allison, and here's a name I did not ask how to pronounce, so I'm going to do my best, and I'm probably going to butcher it, Ruari Coleman, bring you a relentless odyssey involving complex characters, a touch of romance, and a fistful of masked lunatics. It sounds like a really fun book, and if you're somebody who's always wanted to do something, I suggest you check it out. And just know that, if there's something that you want to do, a podcast, a comic, write that novel you've always been thinking about, you can do it too. We're two people that decided to make it happen for ourselves, and I think it's worth shouting out. And anyone else who has a project like this that they want shouted out, you can always email it into the podcast at shelffilmpodcast@gmail.com. Because I think we should all be supporting each other. And check out the book, Identity Stunt. Again, that's identitystunt.com or at Comixology. Or even better yet, go into your local comic book brick and mortar store and ask them to order it. Support your local establishments. Read this awesome story about a Jordanian-American stuntman who's caught up in a mistaken identity case, it looks like. So, sounds awesome. I'm going to check it out. You should check it out. Subscribe to that series and enjoy the rest of the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Shelved. I am your host, Jeremy Meyer. Now, before we get into this interesting script that we're going to be talking about today, I just want to get our normal plugs out of the way. As always, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Shelved Podcast. I've actually been running a lot of polls on Twitter lately to help pick my next scripts. The next one I'm going to do is I'm obviously going to cover a Marvel movie script, as I have 3 of them, before Infinity War comes out to drop on the same week as Infinity War. So you can check out our poll on Twitter and you can vote for that. I've also been running some contests related to posting GIFs related to movies and guessing. I want to kind of just try experimenting with some of this stuff just to see if there's maybe a way to run some contests on social media. I would love to. I have some digital movie codes to give away. I've been sitting on a Power Rangers digital code for a while for that new Power Rangers film, which I think is actually a very good movie. It just didn't make my list of top 10 from last year, but that was a movie from 2017 that I had a lot of fun with, really enjoyed. So keep an eye out on that stuff on the social media, and I'm going to be running some contest stuff soon, and maybe you can win a digital code for Power Rangers, and I also have a couple others sitting around. But yeah, follow us on the social media at the Instagram as well. I'm hopefully going to be experimenting with some Instagram live stuff in the future. So again, that's at Shelve Podcast at both of those. You can email the show at shelvefilmpodcast@gmail.com, especially because at the beginning of this episode, you probably already heard a tag for the Identity Stunt comic book. I want to start, giving the shout outs to people who are making their own things and just want to get the word out. I'm not going to charge you guys. I'm not looking for your money. I just want to help spread the word. So if you have anything that you're working on that you want to promote, send it to us. Email us at shelvedfilmpodcast@gmail.com, and I would be more than happy to give that shout out and help spread the word just the way, people have helped me in the past. I think, if you're doing something, we should all band together and help get the word out on each other's stuff. And I want to meet some of these people and see what inspires them and maybe, make some friends along the way. So if you got any projects you're working on, just let me know. And as always, we do have our Patreon, which offers different reward tiers for a lot of different options. If you want to come and be a guest on the show, we can do a call-in, we can do a Skype. If you live nearby, we can meet up, sit down, talk about some movie stuff. I'm trying to work on getting some more interviews through some people that I know. We'll see if that happens. We also have rewards for special bonus episodes for some Star Wars commentary tracks, or to cover the DCEU film franchise, which I just watched Justice League for my third time. And honestly, I have some changing opinions of it every time I see it, because I watched it on my own on the Blu-ray just to, kind of firmly establish my stance on the movie. And then a coworker of mine wanted to see it, so we watched it again at work. So I have some thoughts on Justice League and again, the whole DC franchise, but be sure to check out that Patreon. It's patreon.com/shelved, just so we can get some of that stuff out there for you. And you can help support the podcast. Honestly, it's probably the best way to support the podcast, aside from going and leaving those 5-star reviews on Amazon, which I hope you guys are still doing. It seems like it's been a while since we've gotten one, so just be sure to just pull it up on your phone. You can actually do it. I've recently discovered they've made it so much easier now that while you're listening to the show, you don't even have to search for it on the store anymore. You can just drop a review right there. All right, so that's going to be all for our plugs for this episode. We're going to get right into it, and I have to give a shout out to a friend of mine, Adam Condra, for pointing me in the direction of this script, because it is something magical, and I highly recommend you just go read it. It's very easy to find if you just search for Gladiator 2 script, written by Nick Cave. This is something special. Now, I have been doing some research to try to figure out how this came to be, because it's just very confusing on how this is even a thing. So I have two different versions. One is that Nick Cave just came up with this idea and he wanted to do it, so he wrote it and passed it along and was like, yeah, here you go. Here's my idea. We can do Gladiator. We can bring Maximus back to life, because if you remember at the end of the movie, he's kind of dead. So it'd be a little hard to continue the Gladiator story. But this guy was like, hey, I have an idea. I actually have heard Ridley Scott say that he thinks it's a great idea, so there's that. But I kept looking around for kind of more information about it, and I did see another interview with him where he is actually good friends with Russell Crowe, and I guess they were working together on another project, and Russell Crowe asked him to write a Gladiator 2, to which Nick responded, Russell, like, you died at the end of that movie, right? And Russell Crowe just said, yeah, you figure that one out. So that's kind of all I have. Apparently, Russell Crowe wanted to make a Gladiator 2 and just told this guy to figure it out. So when I kind of saw some excerpts about the script on my quick Google search and search for it, I was fucking blown away because already it's like, all right, well, you're making a Gladiator 2 script. It's going to be a little ridiculous. So what do we got going on here? Right away, the movie opens and we just kind of catch two thieves running in the rain. It's kind of a dark forest area. They come across a dead Maximus, still in his breastplate and with his sword. They kind of pick it up his stuff, and they start mock fighting with each other. Just kind of, hey, we're having a good time. Like, we're seem to be running from something before, but now we can stop and play with this sword and shield. When all of a sudden, one of them is killed by a spear that gets thrown, and just runs away. And the other one just runs away. I mean, Maximus just bursts awake, just kind of like a weird, like, oh, what's going on? And he meets our first new character of the script, which is Mordecai, which sounds like a very stereotypical after death name. So Mordecai brings Maximus to a camp and he feeds him. He doesn't really say a lot to him in the beginning. He says that he saw him in the Colosseum and that he cheered him and he watched him die, which Maximus seems very kind of put off by. He doesn't exactly know what's going on. Like, how could this be? I remember dying and stuff like that. So quickly after this, Maximus falls asleep and he has a variation of the dream that he sees in the original movie, the dream that of his wife and child and walking and brushing his hands along the wheat stalks or whatever they are. And then he wakes up. The only difference is this time he says he sees his child screaming about how they need to go to Elysium. So he wakes up, he's a little delirious, and immediately he just wants to search for his family. And now we kind of get our first explanation as to kind of where they are, which is basically limbo. Like, they never call it by that name. They just refer to it as the Infinity, or it goes on for eternity, which I kind of like the name of the Infinity for limbo. But so yeah, Mordecai explains to him like the nature of the place. He calls it a dumping ground for the unwanted, and that there used to be order here, but the powers are shifting. He's like, there are some good lines in this. He's like, the place has no name because it doesn't need one. And they're sitting on top of a cliff, and Maximus sees that their cliff overlooks a seemingly endless like encampment. Just like tents and fires and people in raggedy clothes. Just basically like when you watch like a Game of Thrones or something, like a war party when they're all camping out, and just what it looks like. Just that, but stretches on forever. So they kind of start walking through the camp. They see two ragged women fighting over food, and Mordecai just separates them, and he seems to have some sort of rank here. Like, people listen to Mordecai. Like, he's not anyone who's in control, but just kind of rules with respect, you know? But he kind of he talks about how he does this because the ones who run the place, the all-powerful ones, will allow him to briefly return home, to which he says his home is Rome. So basically he visits Rome as a ghost. So as Mordecai is explaining this to Maximus, the crowd starts to mob, and Mordecai and Maximus get separated. I should just point out, the beginning of this script is very different from the rest of the movie. It's all kind of weird and feels more like God of War 300. Actually, the beginning of 300 is a very good comparison, especially the scene where Leonidas climbs up to see the elders at the top of the fucking mountain and how they tell him he can't go to war or whatever. That would be a really good comparison to what I picture the beginning of this script describing. So as Mordecai is explaining, like, the crowd separates them, the crowd starts to chant, and an old man screams Elysium at Maximus. So he, catches that on from his dream. When Maximus asks the old man where they're going, the old man says there's a boat out on the water, and Maximus watches the boat disappear in the fog, and then he starts to make his way to the ruined temple on the top of the hill, which is where Mordecai tells him that the elders live, and he's just like, all right, fuck it, I'm gonna do this. I know what I want, I know where I need to go, so I'm gonna go up there. As he's going there, he runs into the thief who took his armor, and he basically strong arms him into giving him his armor back, which is, again, it just feels like a God of War thing. Like he's on a quest and he achieved his armor. I wish more of the script kind of kept with this tone because it's so fucking crazy. All right, so as he makes his way up the hill, Mordecai appears to him and tells him to be wary as they wait to speak with him, but not all is as it seems. And so inside the temple, we see kind of 7 raggedy, old-looking men, and the script names them as like the gods, like Jupiter, Apollo, Neptune, Mars, Mercury, and Bacchus, like these Greek gods. But they're just described as being old men who are a little crazy. Again, picture the guys in 300 on top of the mountain. Like, it almost feels completely ripped off from that, although I guess, I don't know when that book came out, but the movie came out way after this. Yeah, so Maximus says he seeks for his family, but Jupiter, who's kind of the leader of them, says that if they were kind, good people, then they're not going to be here. Like, he's not going to find them because this is the limbo. So Jupiter tells Maximus that there is another god, probably going to butcher this name, but Hephaestus, he's disappeared, and says that he believes that there is a higher power than the 7, and he's amassed converts. And basically, he wants Maximus to kill him, and then he will reunite Maximus with his family. And I'm going to stop right here and explain none of this matters to the later part of the script. It's something I'm actually only realizing now because it's been a little while since I've read this. I was supposed to do this last weekend, but because of Easter, that kind of got put off. But yeah, this stuff never really comes back. Like, it's there for the beginning of the script, and then eventually just doesn't seem to matter. Yeah, so that's a huge bummer because I was so excited for this part of the script, and I was expecting it to be more of this. But Maximus immediately accepts and just marches out, only to be stopped by Mordecai. He tells Maximus that his son is still alive and that his wife gave up her place in Elysium for their son to live. So theoretically, his wife could be in this world, but there's zero chance he would ever find her because it is, in fact, infinite. But Max says that he, too, made a bargain, and he starts heading towards the desert, which is where they say Hephaestus is hanging out in. So we cut to them standing on the edge of a cliff overlooking a vast desert, and Max just starts walking through it. He's walking through the desert until nighttime, and then he makes a fire, and he sleeps using his chest plate as like a pillow. And then a vision of his wife materializes and is like asking him for help, which causes him to jolt awake in the morning. He yells for his wife and hears her voice trailing in the desert as he follows it. But instead he finds a stag caught in like thorns and brambles using his wife's voice, because I guess we're in a weird fucking world and anything can happen here. So he starts cutting out the stag, but it dies and the voice of his wife disappears. Kind of a weird scene looking back on it, because again, none of this stuff really plays into the rest of the script. So Maximus wanders the sewer until the desert, until he's almost dead, and he ends up finding a shelter, and inside the shelter just happens to be Hephaestus, which is kind of a little theme of this script, that there's a lot of coincidence, which it's fine, because the way it's portrayed in this, it almost works. Like, there's things we can brush off, like, oh, they're in this weird land of the dead, so whatever. The fact that it's a coincidence is fine, because the script is already so weird and magical. But he says he's dying, and he says that his followers deserted him. So it's almost implied that, like, when people stop believing in these gods, that they start withering away and losing power, which is something I've actually seen in other fiction before. But he tells Maximus that his son is in danger, and when Maximus asks how he can help him, some weird shit happens. So as Festus basically places his hands on Maximus's head, and he starts seeing a flash of light, and then we cut to the real world, and Maximus is born into the real world out of a man being murdered. So right away we kind of come into our beginning conflict of the movie, where Maximus is born out of the body of a Christian man who is being killed. Now, a big format of this plot is the persecution of Christians by Romans, and it gets interesting because it sends some mixed messages. Now, me not really being religious myself, I actually was like trying to read into some of this stuff, and I didn't really get very far as like trying to correlate it with like actual history and stuff like that. So the movie seems to take some liberties with some of this stuff, but yeah, so he kind of comes out of this as a man is dying, he is born. I don't know if that's supposed to be a Jesus allegory. I'm going to say probably not, but it's just this group of Christians being slaughtered by these Roman soldiers. And naturally, Maximus starts fighting these guys because he sees a bunch of people being murdered who are not fighting back because, you know, Christians are a peaceful bunch. So as he's fighting, a man named Lucius, who, if you recall from the original Gladiator, which I didn't pick up on this until about halfway through the script, Lucius is the little boy that is, if you remember Gladiator, what's his name? Joaquin Phoenix, who becomes the emperor, is constantly trying to hook up with his sister, and she has a little kid. Maximus and the sister used to have a thing. That little kid was Lucius. So now this is Lucius all grown up. So it's crazy. This movie is crazy, and I love it. So there's like the only one left alive is this old man who's just kind of praying and basically waiting for death. And Maximus tells them not to kill him, and Lucius just decapitates them and then orders his men to kill Maximus. And from here, the script just kind of jumps. Like, he kills the guards, but it doesn't mention Lucius getting away. Like, it don't, like, as I was reading it, it seemed like Lucius was going to be involved in this fight, but it just talks about Maximus kills these 3 guards, and then that's it, and just kind of jumps to the next thing. And doesn't say that Lucius ran away. So, I don't know. That's a little error there, I think. Somebody on a rewrite would have to be like, oh, he either fought and ran away, or he's just like, oh, my men will take care of it, and leaves, and then the men get killed. It's never really described either way. So then Maximus starts approaching the town of Lyons and meets 2 young men, Peter and Marcus. And they bring Maximus to Irenaeus. And basically, these are all they're followers of Christ, as they do, you know, they're Christians. So they tell him that kind of Lucius is leading the Romans against the Christians, and they ask for his help because they saw him defeat, you know, these guys, and they're not a fighting bunch. So they're like, hey, you know, you helped us. Like, will you continue to help us? And they ask him to go to Rome and save their teacher Cassian because they know he's going to be killed when Lucius returns. And Maximus just tells them it's not his business, and then asks why they didn't defend themselves in the square. And they actually have this line that I really like, and they say they have faith in a better world beyond, and he tells them that their faith is misplaced, referencing he just came from the beyond. He knows how fucking shitty and crazy it is. So, you know, he tells them, like, you should look elsewhere because that world is fucking crazy. And I like that. And one thing I'll say is, there are actually a lot of really good lines in this script. It is really well written, and I like that. So we cut to kind of a nothing scene of Lucius saying he's going back to Rome, which we already knew. It's kind of just a waste of a few pages here. Big tip to people who are interested in writing. If you have a scene where somebody's explaining what's going on, you don't need another scene of somebody else explaining the exact same thing. So, yeah, so it's Lucius talking to somebody in Lion saying that he's going back to Rome. So we cut to Maximus just napping in a field, again, using his breastplate as a pillow, because all these items of his need to have some sort of use. And we cut to his old dream again of his child, which causes him to wake up. And we see, as he wakes up, he sees that Lucius is leading a group of 20 guards back to Rome, and Maximus decides to follow them. And even though one thing that bothered me is these people asked him for help, and he was just like, nah, it ain't my problem. The next thing he does is he follows these people back to Rome and then goes and finds Cassian. Like, it makes no sense. Why did he bother telling them no if he was just going to do it? It kind of just seemed like padding out the script a little bit. It didn't really make sense. So along the way to Rome, Maximus finds a slaughtered family, supposedly Christian, and Mordecai reappears. He tells Maximus that he can never return to the other world, which to me seems like a good thing. He's basically implying that he's invincible. Like he's gonna live forever. He's never gonna die. He's just on this world for as far as we know forever, which it doesn't seem like a bad thing. And from this point on, it's like, oh, well, what does that first half of the script even matter? That dying god or whatever doesn't seem to mean anything anymore. As I was saying before, and kind of something I picked up on this read, is now none of that stuff really matters. So again, he continues on his way to Rome. He comes across a village suffering from the plague, and he sees Mordecai again, who just kind of keeps popping in and out, and that's going to be a running theme through the script. He tells him there's no need to go around this town, that they're already dead, and so they're fine to just walk through this plague-ridden town. And then the next thing he sees is an animal merchant crashed wagon, but just like ignores him. Like, basically he just sees all of this death and destruction on the way to Rome, and just kind of seeing the way the world was. So then we cut to a classroom in the city of Rome, and this is where we meet Cassian and his son Marius. And Cassian is teaching a class, and the students get distracted by seeing Lucius return. Like, apparently Lucius is this big, proud warrior, and everybody likes him, so everybody's distracted. And he just dismisses the class, and Marius seems really alerted by Lucius, because obviously we learn that he's going to try to kill Cassian. So Marius asks, what are they going to do? And Cassian just says to alert the others. And then after this, Maximus arrives in Rome. And the first thing he does is he finds an inn and looks for a room, and he asks for information on where he can find Cassian. Again, why is he bothering when he told these people he had no interest? I will never understand. But now we meet the new Emperor Decius, who kind of ends up not really mattering much to the script. I mean, especially compared to the way the last Emperor was in the last script, who was the main villain. And him and Lucius have kind of a back and forth on discussing like the methods used in Lions, and he was basically supposed to go there and arrest the Christians, but he just decided to kill them all. And we learn that Lucius has a beef with these Christians, but we don't know why. Something we will learn later in the movie. But he says that the gods are punishing them, and this is why their empire is rotting. It's heavily implied that Rome is in kind of a bad state. They haven't said. They never really touch on why, but maybe it's more in history that I couldn't really find in some of my research. I didn't dig that deep for it. But yeah, it's in a bad state, and Lucius is blaming it on the Christians. One thing we do learn in this scene is that Lucius's mother was a sympathizer to the Christians, so we know that's one reason tying into why he feels this way about it, but that's all we kind of learn. And so the emperor says that they will hold a day of sacrifice, and since the Christians don't generally they don't participate in that kind of stuff, that they're either going to participate and shake off their religion, or they're going to be punished to the full extent of the law. So this will allow them to find out who the Christians are, then they'll kind of deal with them as such. And one thing that's kind of happening in this scene is the Emperor Odysseus is talking about this monkey he has, which, he has numerous scenes with. He seems to be like some kind of animal guy. Like he has a zoo and he has this monkey, and he's just talking about how his monkey's not doing well. And Lucius is just like, "Yeah, your monkey's dead," which is kind of an interesting, kind of dark comedic scene from there. From there, we cut to Cassian's house, where a group of Christians are debating fighting back when Maximus shows up and ends up delivering the message that he said he had no intention of delivering. Just rewrite the whole section of Maximus saving the Christians and then refusing to deliver the message. Makes no sense. Should have been handled better because he says no and then he does it anyway. Just rewrite that whole section. So he delivers the message and tells them that they're going to die, and Marius just tells them that they're going to die with honor. And it's at this moment that we realize Marius is the grown-up version of Maximus's son. So Maximus has found what he's looking for, and he's going to stick around. But Marius doesn't recognize Maximus and just tells him to leave. So he leaves, and he meets Mordecai again, hanging out outside of a temple. And he actually references a statue of Hephaestus, which, again, that plot line is completely dropped at this point, so why even bring it up? But Maximus goes back and later in the night, and he talks to Cassian alone. And, is just kind of trying to understand their ways. And a big part of this script is just the constant back and forth debate of, you guys are going to be killed for what you believe in. Why aren't you fighting back? They don't want to fight back because they don't believe that, good God-fearing men should turn to violence. And Maximus just not understanding that. So as they're talking, they find out that Marius is Cassian's adopted son because he's Maximus's son. And Cassian asks if Maximus is a believer because those who believe in him never die. And I think he means believe in God. But Maximus asks if the slaughtered baby was a believer, from the family that he saw slaughtered. There was a slaughtered baby because of course there is. And Cassian responds that some things are worth dying for. And Maximus just tells him that some things are worth fighting for. And this is just kind of the back and forth we're going to have for the rest of the story. But Maximus offers him his sword and protection because that's kind of the only thing he can do. And Cassius just asks him what it is he wants. And this just prompts him to leave. Maximus returns to the inn, and then he receives a knock on his door. And at the door is Juba, who is, again, I had to look it up, but this is the character, and I'm probably going to butcher his name again, was it Daimon Houston, played in the original Gladiator? So, already it's cool. Like, we got characters coming back. We basically have a Jesus stand-in with Cassian, although they mention Christ. I don't know if they ever talk about Jesus Christ in particular, but I kind of feel like Cassian is supposed to be the Jesus Christ stand-in. But Maximus tells Juba his story as they sit there and drink wine, and then Juba brings him to his business, and he now has a wife and twins, and he's working as a blacksmith. So, just kind of catching up. It's kind of cool to see this old character. So Juba's wife wakes up and kind of, says, like, it's late. What's this guy doing here? Tell him to get out of here. And Maximus goes back to his inn and kind of finally just sits down and grieves for his family and just, sits down and has a good cry. Sometimes you just need to cry it out. So we cut to the next day, and Marius is assaulted by this guy Sardis, who's, another Roman guy, about being Christian. But Maximus steps in to defend him and scares off these other guys. But Marius gets a little roughed up, basically gets like a bloody nose and black eye or whatever. And then we cut to he tells him that they need to talk. Maximus tells Marius. But then we cut to Lucius just kind of torturing a man, Simon, in his home. He has him tied up to a chair and they're beating him. And he's looking for the leader of the Christians. And the Simon won't tell him because, he's He's a Christian. He doesn't want to tell anybody, but once their child walks in, Lucius, like a true douchebag, starts threatening the life of their child, which causes the wife to just give up the name, which is Cassian. So we cut back to Maximus and Marius, and they're kind of going back and forth about having the life of a soldier versus the life of a man of God. And there's actually a lot of good dialogue here. As I said, the script is very well written. Like, every character, like Maximus does feel like the Maximus from the original script. So that's kind of a good thing. But yeah, it's hard. I can't just sit here and go through the dialogue. So it's one thing I actually do recommend reading the script, which again, you can find through just a quick Google. But there is actually a lot of great dialogue in here. And Maximus tells him that his god doesn't seem to have his greater interests at heart, because all Maximus sees is death. And it's at this point where I kind of start to feel like the script is very anti-Christian, because the message here just seems to be that, oh, you need to fight and kill and murder, otherwise you're going to die, and your god doesn't seem to love you because he's just going to let you die. And that just kind of seems to be the message of the script, which is insane. But yeah, Maximus never seems to spend more than 5 minutes with these people. He kind of, he tells Marius about his son, like tells stories, and then as soon as Cassian shows up, he just leaves. And that's just kind of what happens. Like, Maximus just bounces from situation to situation and then just leaves. Like, the script is kind of all over the place in a way. It's just like, it's not a lot happening over a long period of time. And they just keep kind of cutting to different things to, move on. So as he's leaving, he sees Mordecai, and Mordecai asks if he's going to be going to the gladiatorial games, because, of course, it's a movie called Gladiator. We have to actually show the Colosseum. So we go to the Colosseum, and Lucius is there to see Decius, and he tells him that he's learned the leader's name and wants to arrest him. But the Emperor seems rather uninterested, but, he allows him to arrest Cassian, but nothing more. Maximus, at this point, is now kind of just, like, working with Juba, just spending his time with him, it's the only guy he knows who remembers him, and seems to not be completely creeped out by the fact that he's back from the dead. So, he asks Juba, like, what's the deal with these Christians, and Juba kind of tells him about it, and he says that, if his son is strong with conviction, then maybe he should be allowed to live his own life, and that Maximus should just let it go, So then we cut to Marius and Cassian. They're eating bread, and Cassian reminisces about how he found him, in a hospital full of plague people, and Marius was just untouched, hinting at the wife giving up her place so that the son can come be on Earth or whatever. And then we kind of cut to a little bit of a time later, and Cassian is teaching a class, and Lucius bursts in and tries to arrest him. And Lucius taunts him and Cassian taunts Lucius and tells him, that he knew his mother, and that, she's now with God, and he should be happy for her. But Lucius doesn't like this and stabs him in the neck. And this summons, for some reason, the rest of the students seem to just join in with Lucius and just start destroying the body of Cassian as Marius runs away. And Lucius sends his guards after Marius, and they end up catching up to him, but Maximus shows up, and we get like our second action scene of the movie over halfway through, where he kills these 3 guards and helps Marius escape. And of course they escape over to Juba's shop. Marius is grieving, and his adopted father just died, so he leaves and watches them carry away Cassian's body. But he comes back and asks Maximus, he wants to help. And Maximus says basically he can teach him to fight. And again, the script just seems to be against peace. So we get a quick scene of Lucius looking at, a wall of armor inside the castle, and he recognizes there's like a replica of Maximus's breastplate, and recognizes it from Maximus, and starts to realize who he is, because he's an adult. He hasn't seen him in forever. When all that happened, he was a child, so he doesn't really remember it. So he's kind of putting it together who he is. Maximus and Marius at this point, they ride out of Rome. And then we cut into the Colosseum where they're having their games. And this time the Colosseum is filled with water and boats. And it's people, which I guess is something they actually used to do. I did look into this, but they used to fill the Colosseum up with water and have boat fights and stuff, which sounds awesome. But so yeah, Lucius goes to see the emperor and basically tells him like, hey, the Christians are rising up and that Maximus is with them and that he knows who he is. And this kind of puts the fear into them. And the emperor says that he can take the Christians and, he's going to give them the list of the Christian names after the ceremony with all the, what is it called? The sacrifices, when the Christians don't, they'll have the names of the Christians and that Lucius can have them and do with them as they please. And there's a fun little bit here where Mordecai is sitting next to them watching the games and kind of listening in, and obviously they can't see him because he's a ghost. So, we cut back to Maximus and Marius, and they ride out to a farm owned by James and Justin, just a couple other Christian guys. And, they basically decide that they're going to have to fight back. It's going to be the Christians versus the Romans. And what they amass is an army of 200 Christian men. And what follows next is basically just kind of a montage. We see the Christians training. We see Lucius preparing. And then once that's done, we cut to Juba's forge, and Maximus is there, and Lucius appears. And they take Juba hostage. And when Maximus comes looking for him, Lucius is there, and this is where they kind of have their first confrontation. Lucius is basically trying to convince Maximus to fight with him instead of against him. And then he tells Maximus about how after he died in the arena, that his mother embraced Christianity and that she was stoned for some reason or another. I can't even remember why, but basically she was killed by stones. Everybody just threw some rocks at her. She's dead now. So that's why he hates Christians, because, he believes Christianity killed his mom. So, you assume a fight's going to break out here, but Lucius, lets them go, and he just says that they're destined to fight. And then comes the day of the sacrifice, and Romans are bringing their animals to be slaughtered. They literally talk about how blood is basically just building up in the streets, but at this point the Christians have amassed in the woods, and they're preparing for battle. But in Rome, Lucius, they're going house to house searching for the Christians and finding all the houses abandoned, but they do have one Christian just kind of hanging out back there. God, I hate just calling them Christians. Like, it's the Christians versus the Romans, but that's just how the script deals with this stuff. So yeah, we cut to that, and there's a battle in the woods between the Christians and the Romans, because I'm sorry, I jumped ahead here. But yeah, so they leave like one Christian behind who he's like, hey, yeah, I hear they're all hanging out at the woods, and so Lucius gets the emperor's blessing, and he goes out there. And this is like a really short like wrap up of the script, because this is a good example of, I've talked about it before on the podcast, but any action scene in this movie is simply described as they fight, Maximus kills them, or, they fight, Maximus gets the upper hand, blah, blah, blah. And this is exactly how it is. Like, we have this battle, you assume it's 200 Christians against however many Romans. And there's just like, it's a big battle in the woods. And it does say a little bit about Lucius ends up killing Juba, and Maximus ends up wounding Lucius, but Marius is the one who actually kills him and shoots him with an arrow. And that's kind of all I really have to go on with this battle. Like, basically picture the battle scene from the beginning of Gladiator where they're fighting in the woods. That's kind of what it, feels like to me, but, probably on a sunnier day. And, it comes down to Maximus and his kid during the battle, and Marius asks, what do they do now? And Maximus says they fight. And then comes the most bonkers fucking thing to happen in this script. We get a montage of, I guess, so it cuts back and forth between Maximus talking to his kid, and then we see a scene of Maximus fighting in the Crusades. and then it cuts back to him and his kid, and then it's Maximus fighting in World War I. Then it cuts back, and then it cuts back to Maximus fighting in World War II, and then into Vietnam, and then it goes into modern day Congress, and he's just at the Pentagon, and he's in the bathroom, and there's no mention of, does his accent go away? Like, is he putting on an American accent because he's basically like a vampire or whatever? And he's just in the bathroom washing his hands, and Mordecai appears like in a mirror, and reminds him that he's there until eternity itself has said its prayers, which is a good way of saying until the world ends. And then Maximus just like, Mordecai, how's it going? And then it shows he goes into a war room, sits down at a laptop, and says, "All right, gentlemen, where were we?" And the movie just fucking ends, and it is incredible. I really wish somebody would make this movie. It's ridiculous. It's not great. It's a little boring for a chunk of the middle, but it is so fucking interesting. And I honestly think I had actually misunderstood that. I thought his son was basically going to be Jesus Christ, and it was just like, oh, they actually started Christianity. That was kind of what I was led to believe. I think you could fucking do that, like rewrite it, take out all of the references to Gladiator. You don't need that. It doesn't need to be Maximus. But you look at a movie like Clash of the Titans, which is not like a super good movie. Like, I kind of enjoy it for what it is, but you could do something like that, and it could be amazing and incredible. And oh my god, I would love to see this so bad, because like I love a good like sword and sandals movie, Gladiator being one of the best. And the Clash of the Titans movies, whether the old one or the new one, they're kind of again at the peak of that kind of stuff. And you could make this some nameless character, fuck it, call him Leonidas or something, I don't know, just steal a name from 300. And you could have some kind of crazy, weird, entertaining movie that I would totally be for. Like, I was even telling my friend Nick, who's been on the show for the Dragon Ball Z episode, about this, and he's just like, man, I want to see this movie. And I 100% completely agree. It is ridiculous. Nick Cave, I would love to talk to you about this and just like pick your brain about what was going on. I would love to hear like Ridley Scott talk more about it. I would love to hear Russell Crowe's opinions on it. I need to do all the research I can for this. It's kind of one of my favorite scripts I've read for the show, just in the way it is batshit crazy. And I highly recommend reading it. If you have any interest in the show, just listening to me talk about it and run through the plot does not do it justice. As I said, it does get into some kind of boring back and forth about Christianity versus, murder. But that's kind of the joy of it. It's just this insane, ridiculous thing, and I highly, highly recommend reading it. Again, just Google Gladiator 2 and maybe Gladiator 2 script, and then maybe add PDF at the end of that. That's usually how I find a lot of my stuff. And it should be like one of the first links. You have to read it. It's amazing. It's if you want to get the full effect. But yeah, I guess that's going to be it for Gladiator 2. I want to see this movie made. I don't want to see it made exactly how it is. A little bit of rewriting. Take out the Gladiator name, and it's all good. But yeah, I love this movie. Definitely check it out. That's going to be it for today's episode. Again, be sure to check out all those social media links. Again, check out the Twitter. We're going to be hosting some contests to pick our next script, help us pick our Marvel movie, and help us pick, or, if you want to win some Power Ranger stuff, I might be running a contest for that very soon. So keep an eye out for that. And by Power Ranger stuff, I mean a digital code for the movie, which I actually think is very good. So that's going to be it for today's episode. Be sure to check back for our next episode. I think I'm going to do God Particle, which is the original script for the movie that ended up becoming the Cloverfield Paradox before they rewrote it into a Cloverfield movie. So I think that one's going to be a lot of fun to read. I have both the scripts for 10 Cloverfield Lane and the Cloverfield Paradox, both originally called The Cellar and God Particle. So I'm going to check those out, God Particle is going to be next. Be sure to check out for that episode. And then, we're going to do a Marvel movie for Avengers. So be sure to look at Twitter, hit that poll so you can see which one we're going to be doing. Again, that's our Twitter, @ShelvedPodcast. And as always, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/shelved for some awesome bonus episodes. You can even be a guest on the show if you want. I have a phone hookup now. We can call it in, and we can sit there and chat and have a phone call about a script or some movies or, whatever you want to talk about. So thanks for listening, and be sure to check out our next episode based around God Particle.